Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Blue Jays Today. We're your boys. We always got something to say about the Toronto Blue Jays. I'm your host, Adam Peddle.
And I'm your host, Nicholas Playlog. And today, folks, we have a very special guest joining us. Journalist, analyst, brings you your Blue Jays news, and is frankly just a stud in his own right. We're talking about Shi Davidi. What's up, bro? How's it going?
It's going all right, guys. Fun to be down here back in Dunedin with baseball returning and pitchers and catchers getting going. Nice to hear the sounds of mitts popping again, a few bats cracking as well. So great time of the year.
Yeah. What's the overall energy, this type of this kind of year, man? I know you've been down there a few times. So, what's the energy amongst everybody?
Well, it's different for every person, right? Because you've got guys at different points in their career, but the conversations that I've had, and not everyone has reported just yet at camp. Players don't have to until the weekend. And so there's a little bit, position players don't have to until the weekend. So there's a bit of time before the entire group's there. But I think there's a lot of positive energy, a lot of optimism over what the things that the individual players have done over the off season. Obviously, there's still some lingering bad taste over what happened at the end of last season. And that's obviously something that the whole team needs to overcome because it wasn't a great ending to the 2023 season. But there's always this sense of renewal during spring training. It's a new season. You come out of winter, you're in the sun, you're trying to get going again. And so there's always that little bit of energy knowing that you're jumping into a new season and a new opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. Dude, that was phenomenal answer, by the way. But I loved what you brought up there, just talking about like the personal things that people are doing, the personal achievements. Obviously, the biggest talking point that we've heard about, and Blue Jays Twitter is just going crazy for, is Alec Manoa just looking like a completely different person. So he is owning the media spotlight right now and is just looking phenomenal. Is there anyone else that you've seen in the Toronto Blue Jays camp so far that has kind of had a similar transformation or a great offseason when they're walking into camp this year?
Well, I think for the reasons that you just mentioned, Alec Manoa is the obvious answer to that question, right? And that in some ways is a little bit of the only answer because there's just been so much questions around him and how he's going to perform this season, and whether it's a rebound, last year a blip, what went on, all those different elements. And then you see him walking through camp, and you're right, he does look like a person at the top of his game. And it's the most tired of spring training tropes. Dude is in the best shape of his life. And but that very well may be the case here for Alec Manoa. And so he's such a swing for this franchise. If he's closer to the 22 version of himself than the 23 version of himself, I mean, imagine that slotting in once again behind Gausman, behind Barrios, behind Bassett, with Kikuchi having righted himself. All of a sudden, that's a pretty daunting starting rotation if it all comes together. And so I think for that reason, Manoa is the prime answer. I'm sure when Vladimir Guerrero Jr. gets here, there'll be a lot of impressed looks at him too, at least based on the Instagram videos. Based on
you saw them, right?
I have, and also what I've heard about the work that he's put in. I think that for a number of reasons, he's going to be extremely excited about getting this season going and turning the page on last year. So when he arrives, I'd expect that to be the answer, but. For the time being, Alec Manoa really is the guy who's turning heads.
Well, let's talk about Vladdy for just 1 second, because obviously there was the whole arbitration thing that just went down. And I mean, there was a big talk around Blue Jays fans in general about why the Toronto Blue Jays decided to even go with that route when we're talking about a player of Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s caliber and supposedly supposed to be your franchise guy. Why are we dealing with a $2 million swing here? Do you think that Guerrero, after having those meetings, is going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder and just wanting to show everybody that like he really is the Blue Jays guy?
Well, I don't want to go too long on this because to me, I'm really fascinated by the arbitration process in general. I kind of nerd out on it a bit.
Nerd out.
But I will say this. So at its core, arbitration is just about finding comps, right? My numbers are similar to this player's numbers at this point in time of our service clock, and therefore I should be paid X amount, right? And so in this case, the Blue Jays and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. couldn't agree on a comp, and that's why you saw such a difference in numbers. And the reason I was sort of surprised by that is because all along his career, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has been tied to Pete Alonso, both in numbers, service time, and salary. And so Guerrero was initially ahead of him. Alonso matched him, and this year moved ahead of him. And it seemed to me that that was a pretty good negotiating starting point. For whatever reason, the sides couldn't reach an agreement before the deadline. The Blue Jays are a file and trial team, so you often go to a hearing. And when you get to a hearing, there are different ways you can argue that, right? Like you can either belittle a player, you can point to comps, you make different comparisons, you say these are the reasons that this salary is the right one for him. And at that point, how a player ends up taking it depends on how the argument is made against him or what he hears in the hearing room. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was in the hearing room in Phoenix. He heard what the lawyer hired by the Blue Jays presented against him. These are things that the Blue Jays would have had to approve. And if there's something there that bothers him, I mean, that can linger. So I don't know if there's something specific there that has bothered him. But I think anytime you go into the room, like you're going to be upset because the team is comparing you to somebody that you don't believe is an accurate reflection of your performance. And so this can be something that, lingers. This can be something that initially caused some irritation, then disappears. Ultimately, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. performs the way he's capable of performing this year. He's going to do very, very well in arbitration. His side won the case, so the comp that he used was clearly more accurate than the one the Blue Jays put forth. And what he does with that will be entirely up to him.
Right. And just to wrap this kind of conversation up in a bow, do you think overall, in your opinion, Shi, do you think it was kind of worth the Blue Jays' time to go through that process, or maybe could have done a little bit more harm?
Ultimately, to me, again, I don't know exactly what the middle ground is, or during their negotiations, what the Blue Jays decided was their final number, and did they go beyond what they put forward as their offer to the arbitration in hopes of getting a deal done. I don't know the exact ins and outs. Mm-hmm. So clearly the Blue Jays felt that they had gone as far as they were going to go in their pre-arbitration filing deadline discussions. And the gap they felt was too wide. They felt confident enough in their number. So they decided to file. And, the Blue Jays are a team that's known as file and trial. That means if you exchange numbers, the only way you're avoiding a hearing room is if you do a multi-year deal. Given where Guerrero is and how close he is to free agency, that really wasn't going to be a realistic option. Not in the way that it was for Bo Bichette a year ago. And so, was it worth it for them? I mean, clearly they felt that they needed the arbitrator's help to break the tie here. And so, ultimately, I do think that you go to a hearing room with a player, you end up losing, whether or not you win or lose the case. And ultimately, we'll see if there is some fallout from it and how bad it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of players being worth their value, we were stoked here at Blue Jays today when the Toronto Blue Jays decided to bring in Justin Turner. That dude is a freaking stud. The energy, the smile that he brings. I was literally at work today, just like rewatching Justin Turner walk into the building. Like I feel like there's just an aura around this dude. What do you think Justin Turner is going to bring to this team, and B, have you had a chance to talk to him at all? And just like, what is the general vibe about Justin Turner coming into the Toronto Blue Jays?
Look, I think there's a ton of excitement about him. And I mean, you spoke pretty well there about some of the reputation that he brings in, but I think from players, what they like about him is that he's known as, I mean, I don't want to use the term hitting savant, but just a guy who really understands the game and sees it at a really elite level and can help elevate his teammates, not just through his performance, not just by what he does in the batter's box, by the type of information that he shares and the way that he motivates guys and the way that he brings people together. And, you know, I always think back to one of the videos, I think this came out around the pandemic season time, but just one of those practical joke videos put out by the Dodgers of him kind of prank calling a bunch of his Dodgers teammates. And, you know, he calls them, but then he's like, hey, I can't talk right now. Let me call you back. And guys have different reactions in terms of how whether they're confused or not, or the guys are like, wait, didn't you call me? And then, you know, a few guys are really get after him at the end. And I think that kind of energy, that kind of personality, it clearly shows how much his teammates liked him and how much his teammates enjoyed him. And obviously he was there a very long time and he had some long-standing relationships. But I think when you have that type of personality, that somebody who brings people together and you're able to combine that with, you know, very high level performance on the field, that's when you get a special player. And in talking to people who know him, this is a guy who's considered someone who could be a future manager if that's what he wants. This is someone who's got a lot more to give to the game once he's done playing, but there's still lots there from a playing perspective. And if he can be anything like what he was for the Boston Red Sox, for the Blue Jays this season, that'll be a significant boost for this club.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's still hopefully a year at least when he's with the Toronto Blue Jays left of some good playing. Because when you look over at Justin Turner and what he does, especially against the fastball at his age, 39, the way he's able to turn around and connect out in front with those heaters still and pulling them over the left wall, like that's pretty impressive. And when I look at the Toronto Blue Jays last year, and now I'm not too sure because I'm obviously not familiar with the team up close with them. I wasn't sure if it was an approach thing, but it seemed like a lot of the Blue Jays players were kind of not doing so well against fastballs, whether it be the sinker or the 4-seam or 2-seam. Bringing Justin Turner in, do you think that was maybe a good move from the Blue Jays standpoint to have someone kind of show them how it's done to get out in front and attack the number one pitch?
I mean, I don't think that that's the reason why they brought him in, right? But having that there, it's great. Look, we're going to talk about hitting. There's been obviously a ton of conversation about what happened last year, and was that strategy, was that approach, was that fundamental? The Blue Jays obviously spent a ton of time digging into that. The Blue Jays have really transformed a lot of their game planning process on the offensive side, where last year you had Dave Hudgens doing the strategy stuff, and you had Guillermo Martinez working on the fundamentals, and each one of them sort of equal in message building. Now that's unified. All that stuff is going to come out of one voice through Don Mattingly. Guillermo Martinez, Hunter Mentz, and Matt Haig will continue to do a lot of the other work with those players too. But when the Blue Jay players are listening to game plans and talking about the things that they're going to hunt and how they're going to go after a pitcher, be it, you know, are you going to hunt the fastball? Are you going to look for the breaking ball? What are the pitches that you're going to attack? What are the zones you're going to attack? What sides of the plate? Things of that nature. All that's going to be coming together in one voice from Don Mattingly, who will be talking both strategy and fundamentals at the same time. And maybe that makes things a bit more clear. Maybe that helps. I don't know that the information muddled. Hitting is individual. It can be really hard to bear down on sort of hitting because, you know, you can, from a pitching perspective, the pitcher is always in control, right? So you can, to some degree, understand why certain decisions are made. But from a hitting perspective, it's more complicated because the hitter is always reacting. So you can have the best plan in the world. If you keep on getting stuff that isn't what's in your plan, you're right away, you're adjusting, and you may not look quite as crisp as you did beforehand. So You know, that's a very long answer to your question. But I think having another guy like Justin Turner with his experience, understanding the moment, somebody who's been able to think through a ton of at-bats in the highest of leverage of situations is really helpful. And he's going to be someone that the other hitters respect because of who he is and what he's accomplished.
Well, obviously, like you said, adjustments need to be made on the hitting side of things. And there has been so many conversations this entire offseason about what it was and what they can do moving forward. Being where you're at right now, being in Dunedin and just seeing it firsthand, have you noticed anything that Don Mattingly is doing differently maybe than they weren't doing last year, or potentially a different strategy or implementing a different approach? Are you privy to anything like that so far?
Well, not just yet, because again, not all the hitters have reported yet, and they're not doing sort of the full workouts that they'll start doing once the entire group does report and really gets going there. So we'll see some of that, but really a lot of the changes are going to be evident in game planning ultimately once the games are going, right? In terms of, okay, what are you doing with pitchers? And spring training games aren't going to be a great barometer of that, because certain hitters may go into a game and they may just be like, you know what, I just want to see fastballs today, so I'm just worried about timing my pitches up. And they may not even want to swing, or they may not want to do certain things because they just want to gain a certain feeling from a timing perspective. And some games it may just be, I'm only looking to try and hit sliders to the right side of the field or something along those lines. So there are different goals that aren't always sort of oriented towards, delivering a hit or whatever the case may be. It's more about just gaining feels and building up comfort to get yourself ready for the season. So spring training isn't a great barometer of that. But one thing I think we saw a lot of from the Blue Jays last year were just games in which they had a really tough time against the starting pitcher, maybe the first and into the second time through the order, and then maybe second, third, they really started getting to that pitcher. And I wonder if I think maybe a positive sign or maybe a leading indicator will be if the Blue Jays are to just look like they're on pitchers earlier in ball games than they were last year. And perhaps that's something that may be a tell that things are different this year.
Okay. No, well said. Well said. I wanted to kind of pivot towards some of these prospects coming into the Blue Jays camp, because there's a lot of buzz, obviously, around Ricky Tiedemann. Have you gotten a chance to hear what's going on with him? I heard he's put on like 19 pounds of muscle. That's exciting. Go Ricky T. Get on that muscle, man. Tell me, what's the energy around Ricky T? Are people expecting Ricky Tiedemann to maybe make some sort of impact this year, or are we still kind of waiting for an opportunity to open up for Ricky Tiedemann on the Blue Jays?
Well, yes and yes on that last part. The Blue Jays do certainly believe that he's someone who's knocking on the door. And I mean, with that stuff, with that repertoire, he absolutely should be. I mean, you can make a case that some of his stuff is big league ready. There's always some fine tuning. Can he be a little bit sharper with his fastball command? Shape of slider is something he worked on a fair bit last season, and he feels like he got that in a good spot. When he's locating his fastball, it just really further weaponizes his changeup and makes it all the more lethal. So and he is making up for lost time a little bit last year, because he just logged something in the neighborhood of 60 something innings. That wasn't ideal. The Blue Jays were certainly hoping for more. In terms of physically where he's at, when I spoke to him last week, he said that he's in general lost so much weight in previous seasons and struggled to keep it on that he wanted to come to spring training a bit heavier. So he's got that bulk to hold him over or carry him through the entire season, as once you're in the grind and you start losing weight. And so I think that has him set up in a good spot. The way he finished last season has him set up in a good spot. Right now, the Blue Jays are pretty set from a pitching perspective. Once injuries start and if there's some issues with performance and things of that nature, at that point, depending on where Tiedemann's going to be at, he'll certainly be in the conversation every time there's a need.
Yeah. I mean, Tiedemann is extremely exciting, and just watching his his work ethic, I mean, I feel like he is going to be somebody special, and I think all Toronto Blue Jays fans are extremely excited about him. In your opinion, this spring training, is there any potential other under the radar prospects that you are really keeping a close eye on, that you're excited about, who could potentially make an impact on the Toronto Blue Jays? Maybe not even this season, but in the future, and you really want to keep a close eye on them this spring training? Well,
look, I think there are going to be some familiar names like Aurelvis Martinez and Addison Barger and Spencer Horwitz and Davis Schneider, who we expect to be on the team. I guess guys who have been around the club are just really knocking on the door. But, a couple of names that Blue Jay fans may be a bit less familiar with. One of them is Damiano Palmigiani, Canadian third baseman who's really made big strides. I've heard him compared to Davis Schneider a little bit in terms of his work ethic and ability to isolate in the zone and ability to really just impact the baseball. He's a really bright kid, Canadian, so obviously, and
great marketability. There we go.
But he's somebody who's just performed. He's just hit at every level. He touched AAA last season. Expect him to start there, and where he goes from that point forward will be up to him and how he's able to keep on hitting. Another guy who I got a chance to meet last season was Alan Rodin. Outfielder. He was with Single A Vancouver and then moved up to Double A New Hampshire. And just a guy, I had one rival scout say to me, this guy, just a pure baseball player and maybe one of the headiest baseball players that they have in the farm system. So he's a guy who good contact bat. The Blue Jays have worked with him about trying to get to a bit more power because they think that's in there for him. He's shown some good results with that, even at Double A in a short stint there. He's got a chance to maybe open this season at AAA, and he's the type of player who, with the right push and the right opportunity, could also find his way into factoring for the team this year. So those are a couple of guys that come to mind when you ask that question.
Yeah. No, I like both of those names we are familiar with, but they're definitely a little bit more under the radar for sure, and both very exciting in their own right. One player who not under the radar anymore, Eduardo Escobar. I have truly never seen more upheaval, maybe that's the right term, more upheaval over a minor league deal in my time watching the Toronto Blue Jays at all, dude. Like, it comes out at 11 o'clock last night, all of Blue Jays Twitter. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. And it's a minor league deal. He's going to come to spring training. But I think the whole sentiment from Blue Jays fans as a whole was another infielder, an older infielder. Can you give us a little bit of insight?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. A little bit of insight as to why the Toronto Blue Jays may have been targeting Eduardo Escobar, why they brought him in on this minor league contract, and potentially what he could bring to this team. Whoa, time for your daily Betway breather. A quick reminder that the best place to bet is on Betway. Must be 19 years of age or older to play. In collaboration with iGaming Ontario, please bet responsibly. Now, back to the content.
All right, so first off, let's start with this. There's no such thing as a bad minor league deal, right? You're not committed to anything.
That's what I'm saying, man.
You get to bring the guy to camp and you have a look at him, and if he fits, that's great. Now, let's remind everybody about Eduardo Escobar has been a really good player. I mean, 5 times in his career, 20-plus home runs. He was all-star in 2019.
2019, yeah. Carried my fantasy team.
Yeah, so there you go.
2021.
He had a great year in 2021.
Yeah. So I mean, this is not just anybody. This is a good player, switch hitter. And talking to some people who have played with them, I've heard consummate pro, absolutely tremendous teammate, does everything that you want from a clubhouse perspective, on the field, goes about it the right way. The question is, was last year's decline? It was certainly not the type of stat line we're used to seeing from Escobar in his 99 games with the Mets and the Angels. Is that just something that he can overcome? Was that a blip, or was that a sign that he's nearing at the end? Because he is 35, and at that point, some players do start declining. So that is the question for the Blue Jays. But if he can recapture some form, if he looks like the player he was in 2022, I mean, there is absolutely a place for him there. And, you know, he's a switch hitter. The thing is, you've got such a glut of infielders, and even with the ones that they had, how are they going to fit all that together? I think you can still look at it and say, okay, you move these pieces around. I can see how maybe you want to combine that, but there's not going to be enough at bats for everyone. Ultimately, you let some competition happen, and you let that run. You've got an area of depth by which you can maybe use in a trade for down the road. And I think that's one area where you could definitely think that the Blue Jays might try to trade from in the weeks ahead. But you also the Blue Jays also want to be a team with versatility, not just in terms of, oh, these guys can play a lot of positions, but they want to be versatile in terms of the types of lineups they can run out there. So if there's a day where they really need strong ground ball defense, then this is the group you run out there. And if there's a day where they feel that they need a lot of contact, well, then this is the group that you run out there. And if there's a day where they feel like they need damage, well, then you've got a different set. So it's almost just like having a different screwdriver for every type of screw that you may have to use when you're constructing something. So that, I think, is part of this too, where, you know, the Blue Jays don't have an everyday guy at second. They don't have an everyday guy at third. So you try to get a bunch of different pieces to combine into a greater whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it never hurts. It never hurts to have more depth, especially some guys like Eduardo Escobar, who can bring you that experience. And hey, you never know. Maybe it's a year where he comes back, hits over 20, maybe works himself into some big playing time. You never know. You never know. But speaking of having a little bit of a competition internally, you have IKF, you have Cavan Biggio, and you have Davis Schneider. And right now, the roles at third and second base, they're not really defined. I think it's going to be through some trial and error, seeing who's fitting well where defensively. Like you said, all these different kind of matchups right now. And I know that you talked to John Schneider, and he said that it's going to be a cool puzzle to solve as we're moving forward. What's kind of the feeling right now? Where do you kind of expect the Blue Jays to begin testing out this group of three in the infield?
Yeah, so I think that we could expect Isaiah Kiner-Falefa to at least at his start to be the guy who's a bit of the focus at third base. Cavan Biggio, probably a bit of the focus at second, but also getting some third, probably bouncing between those two spots, and probably the outfield on occasion if needed as well. And Davis Schneider, John Schneider said that they right now want to or envision him primarily playing at second base and left field on certain days. If there's a left-hander that they really feel he's going to fare well against, so you might see him in left field in those days. So I think that's the initial sort of setup. Now, does somebody perform really well and take the job and running with it? Does somebody struggle, leading to some different configurations? That is all to be decided. But at least as things stand right now, is sort of the way the Blue Jays may have this on their vision board as they jump into the season. I think that's where things stand.
Okay. Speaking about vision boards, we're kind of coming to time right now, and I know you're a busy guy. I was hoping to potentially wrap this thing up by getting your vision for the Toronto Blue Jays in 2024, and just, I guess, evaluating this team and answering the question, is this enough? Is this squad enough to, in your opinion, take them over that hump that they keep hitting, that glass ceiling of wild card and then out? Is this squad going to be able to potentially go further than that?
So it's really interesting. And I've had this discussion, something along these lines with a number of people. But if you took this roster and you just removed the name Blue Jays from it, and you removed sort of the recent history from it, and you presented it to somebody and said, how would you feel about this as a starting point? I think that if you were just, again, looking at it objectively without the lens of what's happened the past couple of off seasons, you'd probably say, yeah, let's go. This is pretty good. But for everybody around the team, fans, obviously players, coaches, there is that lens of what happened last season and what happened in 22 and what happened in 21. You can't get rid of that. And, I know there are some people on the team who believe that they're a little frustrated that the Blue Jays haven't maximized themselves, or at least they feel they haven't, gotten everything they can out of all the ability they have. And I think everyone's been through a lot with this franchise in the last few years. You think about the pandemic in Buffalo, your 3 cities in 21, 1 game short, collapse against the Mariners, frustrating 23 with just endless amounts of runners in scoring position left on the bases, so many frustrating games, and then the Game 2 debacle in Minnesota. I mean, that's a lot to process in a short period of time. And maybe that's colored some opinion. And then you have the whole Shohei Ohtani thing in the offseason. I can understand why so many people are frustrated right now, and it's really been a lot. But I think objectively, you look at what this group has. Like, you've got a pitching staff that would be the envy of the vast majority of clubs in baseball. You've got an offense with a lot of talent that underperformed last season, but if it reverts to or progresses back to the mean, all of a sudden it should be more than adequate to be competitive. I think even if you look at the Blue Jays hitting with runners in scoring position, if they're hitting 10 or 15 points better with runners in scoring position last season, we're probably having a different conversation. So yeah. I think for all those reasons, in theory, on paper, you would have liked to see more significant additions. I can understand, I can at least see some of the logic in why the Blue Jays approached this offseason the way they did. It doesn't necessarily feel good. It doesn't exactly leave you with the, yeah, let's go kind of feeling, but that doesn't mean that this team is in a bad spot. And so, I think that this is a really interesting team. I think they project well through objective models. Can they piece all the smaller things together? Can they make up some of the gaps and the crevices that really cost them the last couple of years? Can they do a better job there? Get everything they can out of the group that's on the field and maximize the opportunity before them. That to me is where the question for this team lies. I don't think that it's a case of them not having enough talent, but can they put it all together? And that's a conversation we've been having for 3-4 years now. And that's the question that is going to be the one that is the most important for this team this year.
Shi, be honest with me, man. You brought up Ohtani there. Were you on the plane tracker? Because we were on the plane tracker, man.
I was aware of the plane tracker. I was not constantly tracking the plane. Look, I mean, that day was madness for a number of reasons. And look, the Blue Jays did what you should hope that your team does. It's take your best shot at it. Ultimately, the consensus in the industry was that Shohei Ohtani wanted to go to the Dodgers. That's really been the feeling the past couple of years, that it was going to be Dodgers all along. The Blue Jays took their shot. I mean, it's a once in a generation, once in a century type of talent. You should try, but it was always going to be a low probability of success venture. There wasn't success there in the end. And I think that it went on as long as it did raised some hopes that maybe the Blue Jays had managed to elbow aside the Dodgers. But ultimately that wasn't the case. And he ended up at the place where everybody thought he was going to be all along.
That's okay, man. We're just going to beat them in the World Series this year.
That's
it's
right.
all good.
That's right.
There you go. It's perfect for the narrative.
Exactly. Well, Shi, we appreciate you taking your time down there in Dunedin, Florida, to come on to Blue Jays today and give us your insight down there with the boots on the ground and tell us what's happening in the Blue Jays spring training camp. Thank you so much, Shi, for your time.
Thanks for having me, guys. Be well.
Cheers.
Guys, that was Shi Davidi. He is phenomenal. Obviously, I mean, this goes without saying, but if you haven't already done so, go check out his work. Go read his articles. Go follow him on Twitter. Do everything. This guy is literally the best. Thank you so much, Shi, once again, for coming on. Folks, let us know your thoughts about all this in the comments down below. I really like that whole narrative about Blue Jays beating Dodgers World Series.
I think we got to start owning that.
That seems like a winner to me.
Yeah, hashtag bad for baseball. That's what's up.
Right, guys. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. And as always, go Jays, go!